My brother began talking to someone in the mirror. I made the mistake of looking to see who answered back. The reflection smiled at me with Owen's face, but Owen was standing 3 feet to my left, silent and pale as marble. That's when I understood that some mistakes you can't take back, and some doors shouldn't be opened even when someone's knocking from the other side. The thing in the mirror kept smiling, kept watching me with eyes that had too much knowledge behind them, and I felt my stomach drop through the floor because I realized Owen hadn't been talking to himself for the past 6 weeks. He'd been talking to something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally look back. I should probably start at the beginning, back when this was just another weird phase in a long line of weird phases. Owen had always been the strange one in our family, the kid who collected dead insects in jars and spent hours arranging them in patterns only he understood. Our mother used to say he was artistic. Our father, before he left, said Owen needed discipline and structure. I was somewhere in the middle, the older brother by 3 years, who mostly tried to keep Owen from getting beaten up at school for being the weird kid. We lived in a split-level house in suburban Connecticut, the kind of place where nothing interesting ever happens, and everyone's biggest concern is whether the Johnsons 2 doors down are letting their lawn get too long. Owen was 15 when this started. I was 18, home for the summer before college, working at a landscaping company, and mostly trying to save money and avoid thinking about the future. The mirror thing started on a Wednesday in late June. I came home around 7 in the evening, muscles sore from hauling mulch all day, and heard Owen's voice coming from the bathroom. At first, I thought he was on the phone, the way you do when you hear someone talking in another room. But as I walked past, I realized his voice had that particular quality it gets when he's speaking to someone in the same space. The bathroom door was cracked open about 3 inches, and I could see a sliver of the mirror, the white tile, Owen's shoulder. He was saying something about patterns, about how numbers fold into themselves when you understand the right angles. Typical Owen stuff, the kind of abstract rambling that made sense to him and nobody else. I figured he was FaceTiming one of his internet friends, the other weird kids he'd found in some forum about fractals or sacred geometry or whatever he was into that month. I didn't think anything of it. That's the part that keeps me up at night now, how easy it was to not think anything of it. Over the next week, I noticed he spent more time in that bathroom than usual. Our house had 2 bathrooms, one attached to our mother's bedroom and one in the hallway that Owen and I shared. He'd always been meticulous about his appearance in that teenage boy way where he'd spend 20 minutes getting his hair exactly right before school. But this was different. I'd hear him in there at odd hours, sometimes past midnight, always with that same conversational tone. Sometimes he'd laugh, this quiet chuckle that sounded strange coming from him, because Owen rarely laughed. Our mother worked double shifts as a nurse at the regional hospital, often coming home around 10 or 11 at night, so she didn't notice. She was always too tired to notice much beyond whether we'd eaten dinner and finished our homework, and since I was technically an adult and Owen was a straight-A student despite his oddities, we mostly flew under her radar. The first time I actually paid attention, really paid attention, was on a Friday night 2 weeks into July. I woke up around 3 in the morning needing to use the bathroom and saw light bleeding under the door. I stood there in the hallway in my boxers, listening. Owen was talking about doors, about thresholds and spaces between. He said something about how mirrors are doors that most people don't know how to open, about how reflection is just another word for translation. Then he stopped talking, and there was silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then he laughed again, that same quiet sound, and said something I couldn't quite make out. The weird part was the rhythm of it, the way he'd speak, and then pause, like he was waiting for responses I couldn't hear. I almost knocked, almost asked if he was okay, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the hour, maybe it was the sense that I'd be interrupting something private, something I didn't want to understand. I went back to bed and used the bathroom in the morning, telling myself it was just Owen being Owen, that he'd grow out of it like he'd grown out of the insect collecting and the obsession with prime numbers. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. But he didn't grow out of it. If anything, it intensified. By the end of July, he was spending 2 or 3 hours a day in that bathroom. He'd go in right after dinner, lock the door, and I'd hear his voice rise and fall in conversation with someone I couldn't hear. Our mother finally noticed when she needed to shower before a shift and found the door locked at 6 in the evening. She knocked, asked Owen what he was doing in there, and he said he was busy. Just busy, nothing else. She was too exhausted to push it, told him to hurry up, and that was that. But I saw her face when she turned away, the little crease of worry between her eyebrows that meant she was filing it away as something to deal with later, when she had the energy. I started paying closer attention to Owen himself, looking for signs of whatever was going on. He seemed fine, mostly. Still got good grades on his summer school assignments, still ate normally, still slept in his bed at night. But there were small changes, things that seemed minor at the time, but added up. He started keeping his eyes down more, not making eye contact even when speaking directly to someone. His skin got paler, like he wasn't going outside enough, which was true because he used to at least ride his bike around the neighborhood, and now he barely left the house. He moved differently, too, with a kind of careful precision, like he was aware of his body and space in a way he hadn't been before. When I tried to talk to him about normal things, asking about his friends or what he was reading, He'd give short answers and then find an excuse to go to the bathroom. Not always, but often enough that I noticed. The dreams started for me in early August. I'd be standing in a room full of mirrors, hundreds of them, and in each reflection I'd see something slightly different. In one, I'd be older. In another, I'd be wearing clothes I'd never owned. In a third, there'd be someone standing behind me, just out of clear focus. I'd turn to look, but there'd be nobody there, and when I turned back to the mirror, the figure would be closer. I'd wake up with my heart hammering, sheets soaked with sweat, and I'd hear Owen in the bathroom, talking in that low, steady voice. I told myself the dreams were just stress about college, about money, about the future. I told myself a lot of things that summer. The first major incident happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave for orientation. I came home from work around 5:30, earlier than usual because it had rained and we'd called it a day. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual, but there was a quality to the silence that felt wrong. I called out for Owen, got no response, and checked his room. Empty. Checked the kitchen, the living room, the basement. Nothing. Then I heard water running in the bathroom, a steady stream like someone had left the faucet on. I knocked on the door, asked if Owen was in there. No response. I knocked harder, called his name louder. Still nothing. I tried the knob and found it locked. The water kept running, and underneath it, I could hear something else. Breathing. Not Owen's normal breathing, but something heavier, more labored, like someone struggling. I kicked the door open. The lock was cheap, one of those interior doors with the push-button locks that aren't meant to keep anyone out, and it gave way easily. Owen was standing in front of the mirror, both hands pressed flat against the glass, his forehead touching his reflection. The sink was overflowing, water spilling onto the tile floor, and he didn't react at all to the door slamming open or me shouting his name. I turned off the faucet, and in the sudden silence, I could hear him whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I grabbed his shoulder, spun him around, and his eyes were wrong. Not the color, not the shape, but the expression in them. He looked at me like he didn't know me, like I was some stranger who'd interrupted something important. Then he blinked, and it was Owen again, confused and scared. He asked why I'd broken the door, why I was yelling. I asked him what he'd been doing, why he hadn't responded when I called his name. He said he didn't hear me, that he'd been washing his face and must have spaced out. The floor was soaked, an inch of water covering everything, and I pointed to it, asked how he could space out long enough for the entire sink to overflow. He looked down at the water like he was seeing it for the first time, and something crossed his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Then he pushed past me, went to his room, and closed the door. I spent 20 minutes mopping up the water, my mind racing through explanations. Drugs, maybe. Some new synthetic thing kids were getting into. Mental health crisis. Seizure of some kind. Nothing felt right, but I needed an explanation that made sense. Something I could fix, or at least understand. I told our mother that night when she got home from her shift. She was in the kitchen making a late dinner, still in her scrubs, and I laid it out as calmly as I could. Owen spending hours in the bathroom, the locked door, the overflowing sink, the way he'd looked at me like he didn't know who I was. She listened while stirring pasta sauce, her face carefully neutral in that way nurses have when they're hearing concerning symptoms, but don't want to alarm anyone. When I finished, she asked if Owen had seemed disoriented after, if he'd had a headache, if this had happened before. I said I didn't know, that this was the first time I'd actually seen him like that. She nodded, said she'd talked to him, said it was probably stress from summer school, or maybe he needed his eyes checked and was getting headaches. I wanted to push it, to say this was more than stress or headaches, but she looked so tired that I just nodded and let it go. She did talk to him. I heard them through the walls that night, her voice patient and concerned, his voice defensive and clipped. He said he was fine, that I'd overreacted, that he'd just zoned out for a second. She asked if he wanted to see a doctor, maybe talk to someone. He said no, he was fine, everything was fine. She let it drop because what else could she do? Force him into therapy? Drag him to a doctor for what? Spacing out in the bathroom? We didn't have the money for specialists and exploratory appointments, not with her working double shifts just to keep us in the house and food on the table. So it became another thing we didn't talk about, another item on the long list of family issues we all pretended weren't problems. But I couldn't let it go. I started watching Owen more carefully, tracking his patterns. He'd go to the bathroom within 30 minutes of getting home from summer school, stay for at least an hour. He'd go again before bed, another 30 to 40 minutes. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear him in there, that low, conversational murmur that made my skin crawl. I tried listening at the door a few times, pressing my ear to the wood, but I could never make out actual words, just the rhythm of speech, and those long pauses where he seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. Once, I heard him laugh, and the sound of it was so genuine, so full of real joy, that it disturbed me more than anything else. Owen didn't laugh like that with real people. He barely laughed at all. 3 days after the sink incident, I decided to check the bathroom when Owen wasn't in it. I waited until he left for summer school in the morning, our mother already gone for an early shift, and I went in. I'm not sure what I expected to find. Drugs, maybe. Pills or needles or baggies of something. Evidence of self-harm. messages written on the mirror in marker. What I found was nothing. The bathroom looked completely normal, clean even. Owen had always been neat, but this was different. The mirror was spotless, no water spots or toothpaste spatters. The counter was organized with military precision. His toothbrush, deodorant, and face wash were lined up in a perfect row. The towels were folded with hospital corners. I opened the medicine cabinet and found the usual stuff: ibuprofen, Band-Aids, our mother's prescription bottles. Nothing out of place, nothing that explained anything. I stood there staring at the mirror, at my own reflection, trying to see what Owen saw. It was just a mirror, standard bathroom mirror, maybe 4 feet by 3 feet, mounted on the wall above the sink. The glass was old, probably original to the house, with that slight waver you get in older mirrors. I leaned in close, looking for anything unusual. Scratches, marks, symbols, nothing. Just my face looking back at me, confused and worried. I felt stupid standing there, looking for answers in a piece of glass. But as I turned to leave, I could have sworn I saw movement in my peripheral vision, just a flicker in the reflection. I spun back around, heart suddenly pounding, but there was nothing. Just me, alone in the bathroom, spooked by my own paranoia. August dragged on, hot and humid, the kind of weather that makes everything feel sticky and oppressive. Owen's bathroom sessions continued. Our mother tried talking to him again, suggesting a family therapist or maybe a youth group at the church we never attended. He shut her down politely, but firmly. She backed off because you can't force a teenager into therapy if they don't want to go, not without cause. And what cause did we have? A kid who spent too much time in the bathroom wasn't grounds for involuntary commitment. He was still functional, still doing well in school, still eating and sleeping. So we let it continue, because we didn't know what else to do. I had 2 weeks left before leaving for college when things escalated again. It was a Saturday night, around 11. Our mother was working a night shift, and I was in my room playing games on my laptop, trying to distract myself from thinking about packing and leaving Owen alone in the house with whatever was going on with him. I heard the bathroom door close, heard the lock click, heard Owen's voice start up. Nothing unusual. I put my headphones on, turned up the volume, tried to focus on the game. But something made me take the headphones off after maybe 20 minutes. Some instinct I can't explain. The house was silent, completely silent. No water running, no voice from the bathroom. Just dead air that felt heavy and wrong. I got up, walked to the bathroom door, knocked softly. No response. Knocked harder, called Owen's name. Nothing. I tried the knob, found it locked, and felt a spike of adrenaline that made my hands shake. I called his name louder, pounded on the door. Silence. I thought about the overflowing sink, about the way he'd looked at me with those stranger's eyes, and I kicked the door open for the second time that summer. Owen was on the floor, unconscious, his body rigid and twitching. His eyes were rolled back, showing mostly white, and there was blood coming from his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. Seizure, some rational part of my brain supplied. He's having a seizure. I did what you're supposed to do, turned him on his side, made sure he wasn't choking, called 911. The operator asked questions I could barely hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. Yes, he's breathing. Yes, he's still seizing. No, no history of seizures. No, I don't know what happened. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, which felt like 12 hours. The EMTs took over, professional and efficient, loaded Owen onto a stretcher, and I rode with them to the hospital. They asked more questions I couldn't answer. Had he taken anything? Had he hit his head? Any medical conditions? I kept saying I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know. One of the EMTs, a woman named Diana something, tried to calm me down, said seizures can come out of nowhere sometimes, that they'd take care of him. At the hospital, they rushed Owen into the ER while I sat in the waiting room, trying to reach our mother. She wasn't answering her phone, probably in the middle of patient care, so I left 3 voicemails and sent a dozen texts. I sat there for 90 minutes, watching families come and go, trying not to think about what I'd seen. Owen on the floor, his body jerking, blood on his lips. The way the bathroom had felt when I'd opened the door, like the air was heavier than normal, pressing down on everything. I kept seeing the mirror in my mind, wondering if I should have looked at it, if there'd been something there to see. Our mother finally called back at 1 a.m. I told her what happened, and I could hear the shift in her voice, from tired nurse to terrified parent. She said she'd be there in 15 minutes, that I should tell the doctor she was on her way. A doctor came out before she arrived, a young guy with kind eyes and coffee stains on his white coat. Dr. Nathan Cross, his badge said. He told me Owen had stabilized, that the seizure had stopped, that they were running tests. He asked the same questions everyone had asked: medical history, drug use, recent injuries, family history of epilepsy. I gave the same answers. No, 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 I don't know. He nodded, made notes on his tablet, said they'd keep Owen overnight for observation, and we'd know more in the morning. Our mother arrived pale and shaking, still in her scrubs from the hospital where she worked. The irony wasn't lost on any of us, that she spent her days caring for sick people, and now her son was the patient. She spoke with Dr. Cross, asked better questions than I had, medical terminology I didn't fully understand. He was patient with her, explained about EEGs and MREs and blood panels. She wanted to see Owen, and they led us back to his room. He was awake, groggy, confused. He didn't remember the seizure, didn't remember me breaking down the door or calling 911. The last thing he remembered was going into the bathroom to brush his teeth. Just a blank space where the seizure should have been, like someone had cut that time out of his life. They kept him for 3 days, ran every test they could think of. EEG came back normal. MRI showed no tumors, no lesions, no structural abnormalities. Blood work was clean, no drugs, no infections, no metabolic disorders. Dr. Cross brought in a neurologist, Dr. Patricia Lang, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd been practicing for 23 years. She examined Owen, asked him about stress, sleep patterns, headaches. She talked to our mother about family medical history, genetic conditions, anything that might explain a sudden seizure in a healthy 15-year-old. Nothing fit. Dr. Lang said sometimes seizures just happen, that it could have been a one-time thing triggered by dehydration or stress or lack of sleep. She said to watch for any more episodes, keep him hydrated, make sure he got enough rest. If it happened again, they'd dig deeper. If not, he was probably fine. Our mother asked if Owen could go back to normal activities, and Dr. Lang said yes, with some restrictions. No driving until he'd been seizure-free for 6 months, which didn't matter because Owen didn't have his license yet. No swimming alone. Be cautious with heights. Standard seizure precautions. She wrote a prescription for anti-seizure medication just in case, and sent us home with instructions to follow up in a month. Owen was quiet the whole ride home, staring out the window, and I couldn't tell if he was scared or relieved or something else entirely. Our mother kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, and I could see the calculation in her eyes, trying to figure out if she could afford to cut back her hours to stay home more. We got home on a Monday afternoon, and the first thing Owen did was go to the bathroom. Our mother and I exchanged looks, but what could we say? He'd just gotten out of the hospital. Maybe he needed a minute alone to process. But 20 minutes turned to 40, and I could hear his voice again, that same conversational tone. Our mother heard it too. She knocked on the door, asked if he was okay. He said yes, he'd be out soon. She looked at me, and I saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear I'd been carrying for weeks. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew. The seizure hadn't stopped whatever was happening. If anything, it had just shown us how serious this might be. I had 1 week left before college. I should have been excited, nervous, focused on packing and orientation materials. Instead, I spent every free moment watching Owen, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't leave our mother alone with this. I couldn't abandon Owen when something was clearly wrong with him. But I also couldn't skip college, couldn't waste the scholarships and financial aid I'd worked so hard to get. I was trapped between responsibilities, paralyzed by indecision. On Wednesday, 5 days before I was supposed to leave, I made a choice that changed everything. I decided to look. Not just listen at the door, not just check the bathroom when it was empty, but actually see what Owen was doing in there, who he was talking to. I waited until he went in after dinner, gave him 10 minutes to get settled into whatever routine he followed, and then I knocked. He told me he was busy, same as always. I told him I needed to talk to him, that it was important. He sighed, unlocked the door, and opened it a crack. I pushed it open the rest of the way and stepped inside before he could stop me. Owen was standing in front of the mirror, both hands flat against the glass, exactly like I'd found him the day the sink overflowed. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, I looked at the mirror instead of at Owen, and I saw it. The reflection was wrong. Owen's reflection was there, hands pressed to the glass from the other side, but it wasn't matching his movements. The real Owen, standing in front of me, had his mouth closed. The reflection's mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. The real Owen was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The reflection was looking at him with an expression I can't describe, something between hunger and satisfaction and ancient patience. I stumbled backward, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Reflections don't move independently. Reflections don't have their own expressions. This wasn't possible, wasn't real, had to be some trick of the light or my eyes or my exhausted, stressed mind playing games. But when I looked again, it was still there. The reflection smiled, and it was Owen's smile, but wrong, too wide, showing too many teeth. It said something, and I could see its lips move but heard nothing. Then the real Owen, the one standing in the bathroom with me, whispered, "Please." Just that one word, so quiet I almost missed it. "Please." I grabbed Owen's arm and pulled him out of the bathroom, slammed the door shut behind us. He didn't resist, just let me drag him to his room and shove him inside. I asked him what the hell that was, what I'd just seen. He sat on his bed, hugged his knees to his chest, and started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears running down his face while his shoulders shook. He said he couldn't explain it, that I wouldn't believe him. I told him to try me, that I'd just watched his reflection move on its own, that belief was no longer the issue. So he told me. "It started 6 weeks ago," he said. He'd been washing his face before bed, and when he looked up, his reflection had winked at him. Not the kind of thing where you think maybe you imagined it, but a clear, deliberate wink that he definitely didn't make himself. He'd frozen, stared at the mirror, and his reflection had smiled and waved. A small wave, just the fingers, like it was saying hello. Owen had run out of the bathroom, convinced he was losing his mind, and didn't go back in for 2 days. But eventually, he had to. And when he did, the reflection was normal. Just a regular reflection doing what reflections do. He thought he'd imagined it, stress or lack of sleep or something. But the next time he was alone in the bathroom, it happened again. The reflection moved independently, just small things at first. A tilt of the head when Owen was standing still, eyes blinking out of sync. Owen tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it wasn't happening, but the reflection was persistent. It started trying to communicate, mouthing words Owen couldn't hear. So Owen had started talking to it, trying to understand what it wanted. And the reflection had answered back, at least Owen thought it had. He couldn't hear it through the glass, but he could read its lips, and it seemed to know things. Personal things about Owen's life, about our family, about thoughts he'd never said out loud. The reflection told him it had been waiting a long time for someone to notice it, that most people never really looked at their reflections, never paid attention. It said it was lonely, trapped on the other side of the glass, and it just wanted someone to talk to. Owen knew it was impossible, knew he should tell someone, but he'd been lonely too. The weird kid with no real friends, the son of a single mother who worked too much, the brother of someone about to leave for college and never look back. So he'd kept talking to it, kept visiting the bathroom to have conversations with something that shouldn't exist. And the more he talked to it, the more real it became, until he couldn't tell anymore where Owen ended and the reflection began. I listened to all of this sitting on his bedroom floor, my back against his door, trying to decide if my brother was having a psychotic break or if I'd just witnessed something genuinely impossible. The rational part of my brain said psychosis, shared delusion, carbon monoxide poisoning, something with a scientific explanation. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the reflection move independently, seen it smile with Owen's face in a way Owen never smiled. I asked him if that's what caused the seizure, if the reflection had done something to him. He said he didn't know, that he didn't remember the seizure, but the last thing he recalled before waking up in the hospital was the reflection asking him to press harder against the glass, to really try to touch it. He'd pressed his hands flat, and then nothing, just blank space until the hospital. I asked him what the reflection wanted, beyond someone to talk to. He said he wasn't sure, but lately it had been asking strange questions. About the house, about our mother, about me, about how the door lock worked, about when we were asleep, about what existed beyond the bathroom. It seemed curious about the physical world, about life on this side of the mirror. And yesterday, for the first time, it had asked Owen to let it through. He'd asked how, and it had said there were ways, that every door has a key, that he just needed to want it enough. Owen said he'd refused, that something about the request felt wrong, but the reflection had been insistent. Not angry, not threatening, just persistent in that way that made you want to agree just to make it stop asking. We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of this impossible situation pressing down on both of us. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Did Owen want to stop? Did he want to quit talking to it, to stay out of the bathroom, to tell someone who could actually help? He looked at me with those tired, scared eyes and said he didn't think it would let him stop, that it needed him now, that it would find ways to make him come back. I asked what that meant, and he said when he'd tried to avoid the bathroom for a few days after the hospital, he'd started seeing it in other reflections. Car windows, his phone screen when it was dark, puddles after it rained. Always there, always watching, always waiting for him to be alone so they could talk. I made a decision then, the kind you make when you're 18 and think you can fix anything if you just try hard enough. I told Owen we were going to handle this, that we'd find someone who could help, some expert in whatever this was. He laughed, a bitter sound. Who helps with evil reflections? He asked. Who do you even call for something like this? I didn't have an answer, but I knew I couldn't leave for college in 5 days and abandon him to whatever was happening. So I did what any desperate person does in the modern age. I started searching online. You find a lot of garbage when you search for things like haunted mirrors or evil reflections or sentient mirror images, creepypasta, horror stories, amateur ghost hunters trying to get views on YouTube. But buried in all that noise, I found some things that seemed more serious. Academic papers on folklore and mirror superstitions across cultures, articles about mirror gazing and dissociative states, a few websites run by people who claimed to be paranormal investigators or demonologists, most of which looked like scams, but a few that seemed potentially legitimate. I made a list of people to contact, knowing most wouldn't respond or would think I was crazy, but needing to try something. The first person to respond was a professor at Yale, Dr. Evelyn Thorne, who studied folklore and comparative mythology. I'd sent her an email late Wednesday night, explaining the situation as clinically as possible while still conveying the urgency. She wrote back Thursday morning, saying she'd be interested in meeting with us, that she'd encountered similar accounts in her research and wanted to document Owen's experience. We set up a meeting for Friday afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between our house and her office. I didn't tell our mother. I wasn't sure how to explain that I was taking her youngest son to meet with a professor about his supposedly sentient reflection without sounding completely insane. Dr. Thorne was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a cardigan despite the August heat. She had the calm, measured demeanor of someone who'd spent decades dealing with students and their problems. We sat in a corner booth, and she pulled out a notebook and a digital recorder, asked if it was okay to record our conversation. Owen and I agreed. She started with basic questions. When did this start? What exactly did Owen experience? Had there been any history of mental health issues in the family? I let Owen do most of the talking, watching Dr. Thorne's face for signs of skepticism or disbelief. She remained neutral, occasionally taking notes, asking follow-up questions that suggested she was taking this seriously. After about 30 minutes, she put down her pen and leaned back, studying both of us. She said that across cultures and throughout history, mirrors have been considered liminal objects, existing at the threshold between worlds. In many traditions, they're seen as doorways or windows to other realms, places where spirits or other entities can observe our world. She mentioned the Jewish practice of covering mirrors during mourning, the Victorian superstition about draping mirrors after a death, the folklore about breaking mirrors bringing bad luck. All of these, she explained, stem from a fundamental unease about what mirrors represent, a reversed world that looks like ours but isn't, populated by versions of ourselves that follow our movements but might, just might, have their own agency. She asked if she could see the mirror, if Owen would be comfortable showing her what happened when he tried to communicate with the reflection. Owen looked at me, uncertain, and I nodded. We couldn't keep this secret forever, and if Dr. Thorne could help, we needed to give her the information she needed. So we drove to our house, our mother still at work, and the three of us stood in the bathroom while Owen approached the mirror. Dr. Thorne stood beside me, recorder in hand, watching carefully. Owen pressed his hands to the glass, the same position I'd seen him in multiple times, and waited. Nothing happened for almost a minute. Then, slowly, the reflection's mouth began to move, out of sync with Owen's. Its eyes shifted, focused not on Owen, but on Dr. Thorne and me, watching us watch it. Dr. Thorne inhaled sharply, and I heard her whisper something that sounded like impossible. The reflection smiled, and this time I noticed something I'd missed before. Its eyes were slightly different, a shade darker than Owen's, almost black in the bathroom light. It mouthed something, and Owen translated, his voice shaking. It says it's glad we brought others, that it's been wanting to meet more people. Dr. Thorne asked Owen to ask it what it wanted. Owen repeated the question, and the reflection's response was immediate. It wants to leave the mirror, Owen said. It wants to experience this world fully, not just watch through glass. It says it's been waiting for decades, maybe longer, for someone who could help it cross over. Dr. Thorne asked how it planned to cross over, and the reflection's smile widened. Through Owen, he translated. It needs a willing vessel, someone who will let it through. It's been building a connection with Owen, strengthening the bond between them, and soon they'll be strong enough to switch places. Owen would go into the mirror, and the reflection would come out. Equal trade, it says. Fair exchange. Owen's voice broke on those last words, and I could see the terror in his eyes. Dr. Thorne told him to step back from the mirror, to break contact, and when he did, the reflection's smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and angry. It slammed its fists against the glass from the other side, and the sound echoed in the small bathroom, making us all jump. We left the bathroom, shutting the door firmly behind us. Dr. Thorne was pale, her hands trembling as she tucked her recorder into her bag. She said she needed to make some calls, consult with colleagues who had more experience with this sort of phenomenon. She asked if there were any other mirrors in the house, and I said yes, several. She recommended covering them, or better yet, removing them entirely until we figured out what to do. She said that entities like this one, whatever it was, needed mirrors to maintain connection, that limiting its access might weaken it. She promised to contact us within 24 hours with a plan, and then she left, looking shaken in a way that terrified me, because if a professor who studied this stuff was scared, what hope did we have? Owen and I spent that evening covering every mirror in the house with bedsheets. Our mother came home to find us standing on chairs in her bathroom, draping her vanity mirror with an old floral sheet, and demanded to know what we were doing. I told her there'd been an incident with Owen and a mirror, that we'd consulted with an expert who recommended covering them for a while. She looked between us, clearly wanting more explanation, but too tired to push. She said fine, whatever helped Owen feel better, and went to make dinner. I could see the worry in her eyes, the knowledge that something was seriously wrong, but the helplessness of not knowing how to fix it. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound made me jump, convinced I'd hear Owen's voice in the bathroom despite the covered mirror. Around 4 in the morning, my phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Thorne. She'd consulted with 2 colleagues, one a religious studies professor who specialized in Christian demonology, and another who studied paranormal phenomena from a psychological perspective. Both agreed that Owen was dealing with something that existed in the gray area between mental illness and genuine supernatural occurrence. The demonologist, Father Michael Reeves, was willing to meet with us and potentially perform a blessing or minor exorcism. The psychologist, Dr. Lisa Hammond, wanted to evaluate Owen for dissociative disorders and possible psychosis triggered by stress. Dr. Thorne recommended pursuing both approaches simultaneously, covering our bases both spiritually and medically. I called Father Reeves that morning Saturday, 3 days before I was supposed to leave for college. He had a gentle voice, warm and reassuring, and he didn't sound at all surprised by my explanation. He said he'd seen similar cases before, usually involving mirrors or reflective surfaces, entities that existed in liminal spaces and preyed on lonely or vulnerable individuals. He could meet us that afternoon at our house if we wanted, do an initial assessment and preliminary blessing. I agreed, gave him our address, and then broke the news to Owen and our mother. Our mother was skeptical, said she didn't think religious intervention was the answer, that Owen needed a psychiatrist, not a priest. But Owen looked relieved, like someone had finally offered him a lifeline, so she agreed to let Father Reeves come. He arrived at 2 p.m, a man in his mid-50s wearing casual clothes and a Roman collar, carrying a worn leather bag. He was calm and professional, introduced himself to our mother, explained his background. He'd been a priest for 28 years, had training in spiritual counseling and discernment of spirits, had worked with dozens of families dealing with what the church called extraordinary demonic activity. Our mother's skepticism was visible, but she let him into the house, showed him to the living room. Father Reeves asked to speak with Owen privately first, and they went to Owen's room while our mother and I waited downstairs, the tension thick enough to choke on. They talked for 45 minutes. When they emerged, Owen looked drained but somewhat hopeful, and Father Reeves looked grave. He asked if he could see the bathroom, the specific mirror where Owen had been making contact. We took him upstairs, and he had us remove the sheet we'd draped over it. He stood in front of the mirror for a long moment, studying it, and then he pulled out a small bottle of holy water and a prayer book from his bag. He explained that he was going to perform a blessing of the space and the mirror, prayers of protection and banishment designed to weaken any negative spiritual presence. He asked Owen to leave the room, said it was safer if Owen wasn't present for this part. Owen, our mother, and I stood in the hallway while Father Reeves worked. We could hear him praying in Latin, his voice steady and strong. There was a sound like wind, though all the windows were closed, and the bathroom lights flickered. Our mother grabbed my hand, her grip tight, and I could see she was reconsidering her skepticism. The temperature seemed to drop, and I could see our breath in the air for just a moment. Then Father Reeves finished the prayer, and everything returned to normal. He came out of the bathroom, closed the door behind him, and said the blessing was complete. He'd created a spiritual barrier around the mirror, which should prevent the entity from making further contact. He recommended that Owen avoid the bathroom entirely for at least a week, use our mother's bathroom instead, and if the entity appeared in any other mirrors, to call him immediately. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Before he left, he sat down with all of us and explained what he believed we were dealing with. Not a demon in the traditional sense, he said, but a parasitic spiritual entity that existed in reflective spaces. It fed on attention and connection, growing stronger the more someone interacted with it. Owen's loneliness and isolation had made him vulnerable, and the entity had exploited that, forming a bond that now put Owen at serious risk. The entity's goal was exactly what it had told Owen, to swap places, to take Owen's body and life while trapping Owen's soul in the mirror. This wasn't possession in the traditional sense, Father Reeves explained, but a gradual replacement, a wearing away of boundaries until the entity could slip through. The blessing he'd performed wouldn't destroy the entity, but it would limit its power and prevent it from making direct contact through that specific mirror. However, if Owen sought it out, if he deliberately tried to re-establish contact, the blessing wouldn't protect him. His will mattered, his choices mattered, and he had to actively resist any urges to return to the mirror. Father Reeves gave Owen a small medal of St. Michael, said to carry it always, that it would provide additional protection. He gave our mother his number, said to call day or night if anything changed or if Owen showed signs of the entity's influence. As he was leaving, he pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. He said that the fact that I'd intervened when I did, that I'd looked and seen the truth, probably saved Owen's life. Another week or two of continued contact, and the boundary between Owen and the entity would have dissolved completely. The switch would have happened, and there would have been no way to reverse it. My stomach dropped at the thought, at how close we'd come to losing Owen permanently. The weekend passed quietly. Owen stayed out of the upstairs bathroom, used our mother's instead, and seemed calmer than he had in weeks. He wasn't spending hours locked away, wasn't having those one-sided conversations I'd grown to dread. On Sunday, Dr. Hammond, the psychologist Dr. Thorne had recommended, came by for an evaluation. She spent 2 hours with Owen, administering various tests and asking questions about his experiences, his emotional state, his social connections. Afterward, she met with our mother and me, explained that while Owen showed some signs of dissociation and stress-related anxiety, she didn't believe he was psychotic or suffering from a primary mental illness. His experiences seemed genuine to him, and given what Dr. Thorne had witnessed, Dr. Hammond was willing to consider that something unusual was indeed happening. She recommended therapy to help Owen process the trauma and develop coping strategies, and she provided a referral to a colleague who specialized in unusual cases. Monday came, 2 days before I was supposed to leave for college. I'd been avoiding thinking about it, avoiding the packed bags sitting in my room, avoiding the reality that I was supposed to abandon my family in the middle of a crisis. Our mother saw me staring at my suitcases and sat down beside me on my bed. She said I should go, that Owen seemed better, that Father Reeves and Dr. Hammond had given us tools to handle this. I asked if she really believed that, if she honestly thought everything would be fine. She was quiet for a long time, then said she didn't know, but that I'd worked too hard to defer college, that we'd figure it out as a family. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think this was over, that the blessing had worked, and Owen was safe. But something nagged at me, some instinct that said this wasn't finished. Tuesday morning, I woke up to Owen screaming. I ran to his room and found him sitting up in bed, shaking and sobbing. He said he'd had a dream, that the reflection had been calling to him, begging him to come back, saying it was lonely and needed him. In the dream, he'd been standing in the bathroom, and the reflection had been on the other side of the glass, crying, reaching out. It had said that the priest's blessing hurt, that it was trapped and in pain, that only Owen could help it. Owen had felt sorry for it, had wanted to help, and in the dream, he'd pressed his hands to the mirror. The moment he touched the glass, he'd felt something pulling at him, trying to drag him through, and that's when he woke up screaming. I called Father Reeves immediately, explained about the dream. He said it was an expected tactic, that the entity would try to manipulate Owen's emotions, use guilt and sympathy to lure him back. He said Owen needed to be strong, resist the urges, and that we should keep the upstairs bathroom door locked and sealed if possible. Our mother found a padlock in the garage, and we installed it on the bathroom door, made it physically impossible for Owen to go in even if he wanted to. It felt extreme, locking a bathroom in our own house, but Father Reeves assured us it was necessary. The entity would try harder now that it was weakened, would use every tool at its disposal to reestablish contact. That night, my last night before leaving for college, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house, hyper-aware of every creak and groan. Around 2 a.m, I heard it. Owen's voice, faint but distinct, coming from upstairs. I got up, heart pounding, and followed the sound. He was standing in front of the locked bathroom door, his forehead pressed against the wood, whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the urgency, the need. I said his name, and he spun around, startled. His eyes were unfocused, glazed, like he'd been sleepwalking. He asked why the door was locked, said he needed to get in, that something was waiting for him. I grabbed his shoulders, shook him gently, told him to wake up. He blinked, awareness slowly returning, and when he realized where he was and what he'd been doing, he started crying. I spent the rest of the night sleeping on his floor, making sure he didn't leave his room. In the morning, exhausted and terrified, I made a decision. I wasn't going to college. Not now, maybe not for a semester. I couldn't leave Owen like this, couldn't trust that the entity wouldn't find a way through. Our mother protested, said I was throwing away my future, but I was firm. I'd defer for a semester, stay home, make sure Owen was safe, we could regroup, figure this out properly, and then I'd go. She argued, but eventually, she saw I wasn't budging. I emailed the university, explained there was a family emergency, requested a deferral. They granted it, said I could start in January instead. Part of me was relieved. Part of me felt like I'd just made a huge mistake. The next few days were tense. Owen was struggling, clearly fighting urges to return to the mirror. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, try to go upstairs, and I'd have to redirect him. The dreams were getting worse, more vivid, more persuasive. The entity was in them every night, using different tactics. Sometimes it was angry, threatening Owen. Sometimes it was pitiful, begging for help. Sometimes it appeared as other people, our mother or me or Owen's few friends from school, all telling him he needed to go back to the mirror. Doctor. Hammond increased Owen's therapy sessions to 3 times a week, working with him on reality testing and grounding techniques. Father Reeves came by twice more to reinforce the blessing and pray over Owen directly. A week after I should have left for college, something changed. Owen woke up one morning and said the dreams had stopped. He'd slept through the entire night without incident, no visions of the reflection, no urges to go to the bathroom. He seemed lighter, more like his old self, and our mother and I cautiously hoped that maybe, finally, this was over. Father Reeves came by to assess the situation and said it was possible the entity had given up, that the combination of the blessing, the locked door, and Owen's resistance had been too much. He recommended keeping the bathroom sealed for at least another month, continuing therapy and maintaining vigilance, but he thought we were through the worst of it. We weren't. On Friday, exactly 10 days after Father Reeves's first blessing, I came home from a shift at the landscaping company to find our mother's car in the driveway at 3 p.m, hours before her shift should have ended. I walked into the house, calling for her, and heard her voice from upstairs, tight with fear. I ran up and found her standing in the hallway, staring at her bedroom door. She said she'd come home early because she felt sick, had gone to her bathroom to splash water on her face, and had seen it. The reflection in her mirror, moving independently. Not her reflection, but something that looked like her, watching her with dark, knowing eyes. It had smiled at her, waved, and she'd run out of the room. The entity had found a new mirror, had bypassed the blessing on the upstairs bathroom by simply moving to a different reflective surface. Father Reeves had warned us this might be possible, that these entities weren't bound to single locations, but to the concept of reflection itself. Our mother's bathroom mirror was now compromised, and if we followed the pattern, we'd have to seal that room too. But our mother needed her bathroom, and we couldn't just keep locking rooms in the house. We were running out of options. I called Father Reeves again, and this time his tone was more serious. He said the entity was escalating, that it wasn't giving up despite the obstacles we'd put in place. He recommended a formal exorcism, not of a person, but of the house itself, a ritual designed to cleanse the entire space and banish the entity completely. He said he'd need permission from his bishop, would need to gather other priests, that it was a serious undertaking not done lightly. But he believed it was necessary, that half measures weren't going to be enough. Our mother, all skepticism gone after seeing the entity herself, agreed immediately. We needed this thing gone, whatever it took. The bishop granted permission, and Father Reeves assembled a team. 2 other priests, both experienced in exorcism and spiritual warfare, along with a deacon who would assist. They scheduled the ritual for the following Thursday, gave us instructions on how to prepare. We needed to remove all mirrors from the house, not cover them, but physically remove them and take them off the property. We needed to clean the house thoroughly, dispose of any objects that might have negative associations or connections to the entity. We needed to open all the windows and doors during the ritual, allow fresh air and sunlight to flow through. And everyone in the house needed to be willing participants, couldn't have divided hearts or doubts, because the entity would exploit any weakness. We spent the week preparing, took down every mirror, even the small decorative ones in the hallway, the compact in our mother's purse, the mirror on Owen's dresser. We took them to a storage unit across town, piled them in a corner, and locked the door. The house looked strange without them, blank walls where reflective surfaces used to be, but it also felt lighter, like we'd removed a weight we hadn't noticed carrying. We cleaned obsessively, our mother taking time off work to help. We threw out old belongings that had accumulated in closets and drawers, things we didn't need and didn't want, creating space and clarity. Owen was nervous about the exorcism, worried about what might happen. Dr. Hammond had prepared him as best she could, explaining it as a religious ritual designed to create psychological and spiritual boundaries, giving him frameworks to understand it without dismissing the reality of what he'd experienced. Father Reeves assured him he'd be safe, that the ritual was for protection, not harm, but I could see the fear in Owen's eyes. He'd formed a connection with the entity, however unwilling, and part of him was afraid of what would happen when that connection was severed. Thursday arrived, unseasonably cold for late August, the kind of day where summer suddenly remembers that fall is coming. The 3 priests and the deacon arrived at 9 in the morning, carrying bags of ritual implements, holy water, blessed salt, prayer books, candles. They set up in the living room, explained the process. They'd go room by room, starting at the top of the house and working down, performing prayers of blessing and banishment in each space. They'd seal doorways and windows with blessed salt and holy water, creating barriers the entity couldn't cross. They'd focus particularly on the bathrooms, the spaces where the entity had been strongest, and perform more intensive rituals there. The whole process would take several hours, and we needed to be prepared for potential manifestations or resistance from the entity. They started in Owen's room, the 4 of them standing in a circle, praying in Latin and English. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. As they moved through the prayers, the temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath. The lights flickered, and there was a sound like wind rushing through trees, though all the windows were closed. Our mother held Owen's hand, and I stood behind them, watching the priests work with a mixture of awe and terror. Father Reeves sprinkled holy water in the corners, traced symbols in blessed salt on the windowsill, and the other priests maintained constant prayer, their voices strong and unwavering. They moved to the upstairs bathroom, the original site of Owen's contact with the entity. Father Reeves unlocked the padlock we'd installed, opened the door, and immediately stepped back. The room was freezing, colder than should have been possible, and the mirror, even from the hallway, looked wrong. The glass was fogged despite the cold, and in the condensation, something had written words. Get out. Simple, direct, threatening. The priests entered anyway, and the sound that erupted from that small room was like nothing I'd ever heard. A roar, a scream, a sound that wasn't quite human, but was trying to use human vocal cords. It rattled the walls, made the floor shake, and Owen clapped his hands over his ears, his face pale. The priests didn't stop. They increased the intensity of their prayers, sprinkled holy water liberally, and Father Reeves stood directly in front of the mirror, commanding the entity to leave in the name of Christ. The lights shattered, glass raining down, and in the sudden darkness, I saw movement in the mirror's reflection. Shapes, shadows, something writhing behind the glass. Then Father Reeves splashed holy water directly on the mirror's surface, and there was a sound like breaking, a crack that ran from top to bottom of the glass. The cold vanished instantly, replaced by normal air, and the sense of presence, of something other, was gone. The priests finished their prayers, sealed the room with salt across the threshold, and moved on. They repeated the process in our mother's bathroom, in the downstairs bathroom, in every room of the house. Each space required prayer and blessing, but none fought back like that first bathroom had. By early afternoon, they'd covered the entire house, created a network of blessed barriers and protective prayers. Father Reeves performed a final blessing over each of us individually, anointing our foreheads with holy oil and praying for protection and peace. When it was done, when the last prayer was said and the last candle extinguished, the house felt different, cleaner somehow. Quieter in a good way, like a weight had been lifted. The priests packed up their supplies, and Father Reeves pulled me aside. He said the entity was gone, banished from the house and from Owen. The connection had been severed completely, and Owen should experience immediate relief from the dreams and urges. But Father Reeves also warned that Owen would need time to heal emotionally and psychologically from what he'd experienced. Trauma doesn't disappear just because its source is gone, and Owen would need continued support, therapy, and patience. He gave me his number again, said to call if anything changed, but he was confident the exorcism had been successful. Over the next few weeks, I watched Owen gradually return to himself. The dreams stopped completely. The urges to seek out mirrors or reflective surfaces faded. He started sleeping through the night, eating normally, engaging with the world again. Dr. Hammond continued working with him, helping him process the experience and develop healthy coping mechanisms. Our mother went back to her regular shifts. Though she installed new locks and window sensors, some protective instinct kicked into overdrive by everything we'd been through. We eventually brought the mirrors back from storage, one by one, testing each space carefully. Owen was hesitant at first, anxious about seeing his reflection again, but with Dr. Hammond's support, he gradually reintegrated them into his life. The upstairs bathroom mirror, the one that had been cracked during the exorcism, we replaced entirely, disposing of the broken glass at a church Father Reeves recommended that had protocols for handling spiritually contaminated objects. The new mirror was just a mirror, reflecting only what it should, and Owen could use the bathroom without fear. I started college in January, 5 months later than planned, but with the knowledge that my family was safe. Owen was doing better than he had in years, had even made a few friends at school who shared his interests in art and mathematics. Our mother was cautiously optimistic, still hypervigilant about signs of trouble, but gradually relaxing as weeks turned to months without incident. Father Reeves checked in periodically, and we attended a few sessions of a support group he ran for families who'd experienced similar phenomena. Hearing other people's stories, knowing we weren't alone in this, helped normalize an experience that had felt utterly isolating. It's been almost a year now since Owen last spoke to the thing in the mirror. He's 16, about to start his junior year of high school, and you'd never know to look at him what he went through. He's still the weird kid, still into his esoteric interests and abstract thinking, but he's also grounded in a way he wasn't before. He knows what real darkness looks like, what it feels like to be hunted by something that wants to wear your skin, and he's survived it. That kind of knowledge changes you, matures you in ways that have nothing to do with age. I think about it sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, about what would have happened if I hadn't looked. If I'd kept ignoring Owen's bathroom sessions, written them off as teenage weirdness, left for college as planned. The entity would have won. It would have completed the swap, taken Owen's place, and none of us would have known until it was too late. I think about the reflection I saw, the hunger in its eyes, the patience of something that had waited decades or centuries for the right victim. And I think about all the other mirrors in all the other houses, all the other lonely people who might be having conversations they shouldn't have, with reflections that shouldn't answer back. Dr. Thorne published a paper about Owen's case, names changed and details obscured, in an academic journal on folklore and paranormal phenomena. Father Reeves used it as a teaching case for other priests in his network. Dr. Hammond incorporated the experience into her training on how to handle clients reporting unusual phenomena without immediately dismissing them as delusional. Something good came from something terrible, knowledge that might help other families who find themselves in similar situations. Owen doesn't talk about it much, but sometimes I catch him avoiding mirrors, taking the long way around a room to prevent seeing his reflection, and I know he's remembering. He told me once, months after the exorcism, that he still wonders where the entity is now, if it found another mirror in another house with another lonely teenager to manipulate. He worries about it, carries a guilt that isn't his to bear, but I remind him that he survived, that he fought back, that he's free, and that has to be enough. The mirrors in our house are just mirrors now, reflecting only what's in front of them, nothing more and nothing less. But I don't take that for granted anymore. I don't assume that reality is as simple as it appears, that the rules we think govern the world are absolute and unchanging. I learned that summer that doors exist in places we don't expect them, that some invitations should never be accepted, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is look directly at something impossible and choose to fight it anyway. If you ever find yourself talking to a mirror and your reflection starts talking back, if you notice your image moving independently or expressing emotions you're not feeling, don't engage. Don't be curious. Don't try to understand or communicate. Cover the mirror, remove it from your space, and find help immediately. Some conversations aren't meant to be had, some doors aren't meant to be opened, and some reflections should never, ever be allowed to become more than images on glass. Owen learned that the hard way and nearly lost everything because of it. We were lucky. We had help, resources, people who believed us and knew how to fight back. Not everyone will be that fortunate. So I'm telling this story, putting it out there, hoping that maybe someone who needs to hear it will find it and recognize the warning signs before it's too late. The thing in the mirror wanted Owen's life, wanted to experience reality without the limitation of glass and silver backing. It failed. Owen is still here, still himself, still fighting his way through the normal challenges of being a teenage kid in a complicated world. But he carries the knowledge of what almost happened, what lives in the spaces between, what watches from the other side of reflective surfaces waiting for the right moment to reach through. And he'll never, ever make the mistake of talking to a mirror again. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.